because Mark is with us now. He's on line 2. Mark from Anaheim, welcome back.
Hello.
Mark, how you doing?
Every day is a holiday, sis. How you doing?
All right. And for those who don't know, when Mark would call in, he would be so knowledgeable about so much. I used to call in and say, I don't believe his name is Mark, and I don't believe he lives in Anaheim. But then I found out that, and I couldn't go by just what he said because you always knew so much. I know you had a birthday and you're doing well, so I'm going to get off the line, listen to what you have to say, and welcome back, because since I've retired, Mark, I've had a time. One of my friends, I think Carl had something, clouds or something, and they heard you said, Molly Bell retired, and he called me and wished me a happy retirement from hearing a past program of yours on, and I called Carl. I said, Carl, Mark been on? He said, no, not for a while. He's still in exile. So please tell us about what happened in Ventura. And I know you know Katie Hill is a Democrat. She won, and I'm not saying it has nothing to do with it, but will you help us to put all of this together? I'll listen, like I used to say before, I'll listen to your comments off the air. And I close by saying this, all you prayer warriors out there, you know what you've got to do. You've got to keep fasting. You've got to keep praying. Because the struggle continues, but always.
To God be the glory.
Love you, Carl. Love you, Mark.
Love you too, sis.
All right, thanks, Molly Bell. Molly Bell, straight out of Compton, California. Mark from Anaheim, returning from exile, is with us. Mark, again, welcome back.
Somebody somewhere, best beware my crew. Mr. Nelson, how art thou?
Good. And let me just emphasize what Molly said. Mark is not his real name. He's really not from Anaheim.
No?
But that's what the diploma we had to use because all the information that Mark would drop on us, we couldn't have. We had to have it camouflaged. But Mark, we're good.
Well, I was thinking about you today, Mr. Nelson, because this is November 2018. Tomorrow will mark the 10th anniversary of me quitting LAPD and returning back to the surfing world. It also will mark the 17th anniversary of me quitting the Marine Corps out of protest of 9/11. So November is a very, significant month for us. Marine Corps birthday is on the 10th. Veterans Day is on the 11th. So this will be the closest to us doing the show during those 2 days that are significant to many of us listening to the show today. So I hope I'm able to impart some information and knowledge that perhaps they're not aware of that has significance in regards to both the Marine Corps birthday and Veterans Day for the listeners out there. And I know a lot of people have a lot of questions, but before we get started, Mr. Nelson, for those listeners out there who don't know who I am, I'm a retired Marine Corps officer, retired LAPD sergeant, and was a member of many political think tanks. I basically dropped out of all those political think tanks and had nothing to do with any party affiliation after 1992 when I really saw how politics operated in this country. And I began doing radio shows with Mr. Nelson in the aftermath of the 1992 civil unrest, rebellion, riots, whatever you want to call it, primarily here in L.A., but actually took place across the country. And what I began doing is sharing information and knowledge based on my personal experience, having been a member of many of the think tanks that are located on K Street in Washington, D.C., as well as also, how would you say this, Mr. Nelson, various federal and state agencies who I work for behind the scenes. So that's why I had a nom de guerre, nom de plume, couldn't use my real name, and never went down to the radio station when Mr. Nelson was out here in L.A. I always did the show telephonically. So everybody used to always wonder who I was. And, of course, back in those days, we didn't have the Internet. But today, I'm glad we have the Internet, because the one thing I will tell the listeners, one, I'm not going to lie to you, but two, I don't want you to believe anything I tell you. I challenge you to do your own research, but no one has ever been able to prove that I've ever come on the show and lied to them, knowingly provided them with disinformation, or knowingly provided them with misinformation. And I told the listeners I was not going to do any more radio shows after here Trump was elected. However, of course, I didn't know at the time that Brother Dick Gregory was going to make that transition. So out of respect for him last year, I did appear a few times. I have not appeared on any political talk radio shows since early 2018. but I promised Mr. Nelson, the guest, that I would come on today. So here I am, and I don't know when I'm coming back again. So if you got questions, please fire them. But I'm going to tell you, I ask that you just limit your questions to one because we don't have much time, and I'm sure there's lots of people who have lots of questions. Starting with Mr. Nelson, I'm sure Mr. Nelson has a question for me. So, Mr. Nelson, before we get started, as you know, I just finished up the International Surfing Association's World Junior Championships that were held here at Huntington Beach. This year I was with Team France and Team Peru. I was proud to say that one young lady from France made it to the final day and one young man from Peru made it to the final day. But it was great being around young people from 44 different countries, more than 400 athletes. We weren't talking about politics. It was unfortunate because I didn't even realize it. I was actually with Team Israel, not knowing it until I got home, that about the same time I was with Team Israel, there was an attack going on at a synagogue in Philadelphia. But I was with 44 teams. We didn't talk about politics. We didn't talk about world domination. We didn't talk about war. We're just surf ambassadors from around the world, meeting, sharing knowledge, sharing fun. And I kind of wish that these young people were in charge of the world instead of the adults because they seem to know how to get along a lot better. So we even had teams from Russia, China, Guam, all over. And it's just really sad that we can get together in an environment as this with no problems, no hitches, and yet world leaders in these same countries can't seem to talk to each other. Heck, leaders right here in this country can't even talk to each other. So I just wanted to give a shout-out because I know a lot of surfers know I'm going to be on today, so I'm giving a shout-out to all the folks who were fortunate enough to represent their countries in the International Surfing Association's World Junior Championships. Special shout-out to those girls from South Africa, Team France, and Team Peru, Mr. Nelson.
All right, we're supposed to have a break coming up soon. I'm waiting.
But Mr. Nelson, I also had a colored girl there because I had a surfer there from Senegal.
All right, love to talk to a surfer from Senegal.
She might even want to be on your show one day.
Oh, of course, love to talk to my African sister. Mark, earlier we talked and you said don't expect a blue wave. That was a question. Well, the blue waves didn't materialize this week.
Of course not. And the thing about it is, even with the so-called blue wave, many of those folks, they're not Democratic, they're progressives. Just like during the 2010 midterm elections, they weren't Republicans, they were Tea Party libertarians. So this blue wave didn't manifest, and more importantly, sadly, as you know, Justice Ginsburg suffered a major injury here. She may end up stepping down, which will give Trump another appointment. And only the Senate approves judges on the federal appellate court. So Trump will still be able to put his people on the court that will be there for lifetime appointments. The Democrats did make some gains, but, overall, it's not going to be a difference. See, remember when Obama was president, they go, well, why didn't Obama do more? And they go, well, he only had a majority for a short period of time. Well, now Trump can say the same thing for his constituents. Well, I didn't have but a majority for a short period of time before the House got taken over by the Democrats. It's a game they play, Mr. Nelson.
All right, hang on a sec. We got to take a break. They just tell me we got to take a break. We're running late, so I'll let you. And we got folks already want to talk to you, got questions for you. Folks, you wanted to speak to Mark from Anaheim, reach out to us, 800-450-7876. Those are 1450. WOL. Thanks for staying with us, folks. I guess it's Mark from Anaheim, and the number to call to speak to Mark is 800-450-7876. Mark, they've been lining up for quite a while. Before we take any calls, you said that we're on the road to a civil war. Are we still on track?
Like the last 24 years.
I'm sorry, we didn't hear the first part of what you said.
The Civil War has been going on for the last 24 years. Actually, longer than that, because, we had the unrest in 92, so you can count that, too, 26 years.
So
See,
what will it be?
I think a lot of people have the misconception that when they hear the term Civil War, in their minds, they think of what they see in all these Hollywood movies about the battlefield between the blue and the red. That may be a part of the Civil War, but that's not the only part. Mr. Nelson, I say 94 because in June 12, 1994, Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman were found dead. Now, later on, when O.J. Simpson was found not guilty, you had mailers, flyers, and cereal boxes in Ventura County, which is where the shooting happened at the Borderline nightclub, a place I used to hang out on Wednesday night. So I know some of the people who were involved in that, who were victims. But Ventura County, LA County, Orange County, Riverside County, in their cereal boxes had flyers saying, "The N got away with murdering our woman. Let's go out and kill some of their women." And I would see flyers all over the place from LAPD, LA sheriffs, where women had been murdered. Nobody had been found. And it wasn't confined just to LA. So I challenge any of the listeners out there, simply Google 10,000 missing black women. And you tell me that the Civil War hasn't been going on at least for the last 24 years. And nobody talks about it. Heck, you just had a black man killed here in Long Beach at a park. He's in the park with his family. He goes to use the restroom. He's shot and killed by a guy with a rifle. They come back by yelling Nazi signs and symbols and joking about how they just killed another one. And Long Beach Police Department didn't do a damn thing about it for more than a month until certain black organizations got involved. And then by the time they started canvassing the area, there's no evidential value in the area now. That's going on right here in Long Beach. So you could tell Mayhem and others would be glad to come on the show and tell about black women and black children being killed in places like Indiana, Harry Pence's town, his state. Wake up, folks. It's been on for a while. You late to the party.
All right. Some people have been waiting for a while, as I mentioned. 800-450-7876. Ron is calling us from West Palm Beach in Florida. He's on line 3. Ron, you're on with Mark from Anaheim.
Hello, Mark. Thank you for coming on, and I appreciate you, brother. And I want to say congratulations on you being a grandfather.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Now I got to slow my pace, and don't think they don't already send a white woman my family way to try to set me up, but we'll talk about that off air.
And Carl Nelson, you're doing a great job as always, and hopefully, Mark, you continue to come on and the other morning show because you guys are great. I have a question, and it's kind of like two questions. I know you're only limited to one, but it's kind of in the same realm, if you allow me to ask. My first question is about that private meeting with Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin that was behind closed doors for 2 hours. What was that about? And the second question is, what's going on with North Korea? Because it looks like Pompeo is going there like every other month. They seem to be shaking hands and taking photos with each other. So just wanted to see what's going on, because I remember you're saying that John Birch Society wants Korea to be wiped out. And I just wanted to see what your input on that. And I take it off air. And thanks a lot for doing this. And God bless, my friend.
All right, sir. Well, the first question regarding the private meeting with Putin, I'm not going to sit here and tell you I was in the room with them, so anything I would say is speculation. However, let me just tell the listeners this, okay? I have been following Trump for many, many years. And I was born in Manhattan, even though I consider Charleston, South Carolina home. I was born in Manhattan, so I'm no stranger to the Trump phenomena. Trump became a major player with the Russians as far back as 1987. In 1988, the Republican Party wanted him to be George Herbert Walker Bush's vice presidential candidate. So anybody out there who claims that Donald Trump wasn't into politics until recently are either ignorant or lying to you. Remember, I'm not going to lie to you, but don't believe anything I say. Do your own damn research. Trump has been involved with the Russians since 87. When he returned from Russia in 87, he actually started putting full-page ads in the New York Times and other magazines going directly against U.S. policy in this country regarding Russia. So this new phenomenon, or his so-called collusion with Russia, the fact is the guy has been in bed with the Russians for many years. And we put Yeltsin in power after the Cold War ended. So we manipulated elections over in Russia. So what I'm just saying to you is this. The oligarchs in Russia are in bed with the oligarchs in this country. And they're playing you guys as a sucker. They got people in Russia believing that the U.S. wants to kill all Russians, and they've got people in this country believing all Russians want to kill us. The average person is just like those folks I was with. And by the way, I even helped coach the team from Russia at this World Junior Games. We're not thinking about that. The average person just wants to make it from day to day. It's the world leaders that manipulating you to thinking about the big boogeyman. There is no Russia. There is no U.S. There's only money, folks. Seriously, going back to the movie Network. So as far as Putin and Trump, they're just two wealthy boys, and Putin is one of the richest men on the planet, far more wealthier than Donald Trump claims to be, and they're basically figuring out how they're going to make more money. As far as the North Korea, I've never ascribed to the term North Korea or South Korea, and what I stated to you is not only the John Birch Society would love to see the demise of North Korea and China because they believe that the first victim of the war on communism was John Birch. He was never a member. He was tortured and killed in China. And the Korea knows that to survive, they have to knock off this North and South and become unified. Besides, they want to participate in the Olympics. I mean, hey, I got surfing in the Olympics for the first time in 2020. There's not going to be a North Korean team and a South Korean team. There's going to be a Korean team. They're unifying for their own survival because a lot of the money that they're getting from the U.S. in the past is not going to be coming their way, especially as somebody with Trump like Pence in the White House. So they're going to gain their independence. And much of the nuclear war hysteria is always overblown, whereas those of us with my background, because I actually was a nuclear biological chemical warfare instructor, I've never believed that we're going to go to a nuclear war. But it makes great for making money. It's causing fear, causing hysteria. And North Korea doesn't pose a threat, never has, never will. But it makes good for good politics on both sides, for our side as well as their side. So basically, what I believe you're going to see is more of a unity between the Koreas, especially with the Olympics coming up. And as far as Putin and Russia, Trump seems to have no problem violating all kinds of laws when it comes to ethics, making money for his businesses using the White House for him and his family. And that's just going to go even more mainstream with his family now that he has the control over the Supreme Court. Nobody's enforcing any of the laws, the modeling laws in regarding nepotism, cronyism, using the White House for conflict of interest. They seem to ignore everything that Trump does. So he and Putin are just deciding how they're going to make more money. Hope that helps to answer your question.
All right. Thanks, Ron. 800-450-7876. Amma is calling us from North Carolina. Is it Amma or Amma?
It's Amma.
Amma.
Thank you. Good evening to both of you. Thank you, Carl, for having Mark on the show, and thank you, Mark, for coming. My question. Yes?
Where in North Carolina?
Charlotte, North Carolina.
The Queen City.
Yes.
Named after a colored woman.
No.
But most people don't even realize it, but I'm sorry. Go ahead, sister. So you're familiar with Johnson C. Smith, too, huh?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, the blacker the knowledge, the blacker the college, the sweeter the knowledge.
Well, you know, they're doing some great things with, I don't know if you've heard of the Sustainability Village, but they're growing vegetables and things like that, and they have a farmer's market, Rosa Parks Farmer's Market that I go to regularly, so they're doing really good things.
Thank you for sharing that, sister, because that'll cause me to do some research now, because I have relatives who are there right now.
Okay. My question to you is, I've been doing a lot of research, and I came upon something on the internet, and I'm not sure if it's true or not, but when I read it, it was hard for me to believe that it wasn't. Supposedly, it was written by Zbigniew Brzezinski, if I said that correctly, and it's memorandum number 46. I found it on the Nation of Islam's website, and when I read through it, basically describes like how the American government is going to pull out all of the stops to make sure that the African diaspora in America and Africans on the continent never join together. Do you know from your sources if that is a true statement? Because Brzezinski said that he never wrote it, but I mean, it's just, if one reads it, it's just amazing how true it sounds and how it played out, like from A to Z.
Okay, I'm not familiar with the Memo 46 by Brzezinski, but I will say it's probably just like some other documents that have been placed out there and given validity, because even though it may not be legitimate, if you actually read it, it sounds like it was the plan. It's no secret that there's been a deliberate attempt in this country to basically, those of us of African descent, regardless of your melanin count, are dissuaded from having any real connection to the motherland. Mr. Nelson was posting on his Facebook site how there was a discussion about Israel now having some type of alliance with African countries, and I saw somebody put on there, Israel's not a part of Africa. Well, see, that just shows our ignorance. I've never used the term Middle East because I don't buy into Europeans and Americans building a Suez Canal and chipping off a part of Africa and just renaming it. And that's what Europeans...
Hold that thought right there, Mark, because we got to take a short break. I'll let you finish. This is interesting, folks. I want you to hear what Mark's got to say about Israel trying to join the African Union. You want to speak to Mark? 800-450-7876. Ahmed, stay with us as well. We'll take your calls next on FM 95.9 and AM 1450. WOL, where information is power. Thanks for staying with us, folks. Our guest is Mr. Man Mark from Anaheim, and the number to call to speak to Mark is 800-450-7876. Mark, before I let you finish your response to Ahmed's question, the article that you referred to that was in from the Nation of Islam, Brother Jamal just sent it over, so I sent it over to you as well, so you can read it, I guess, when you get off the air. But I'll let you finish telling Ahmed about Israel trying to join the African Union.
So basically, for the listeners who may not have been tuning in before the break, Alma from Charlotte, North Carolina asked if I was familiar with a memorandum number 46 by Brzezinski, which basically stated that there was going to be a deliberate plan and effort to dissuade blacks in this country from basically aligning with our brothers and sisters on the continent of Africa. I don't know if that's a legitimate document, but it kind of reminds me a little bit of the Willie Lynch letter. And the thing is about the Willie Lynch letter, even though when that letter was disseminated, there was some disinformation and misinformation placed about where that letter came from. However, if you read that letter, it's a very sound policy and strategy for keeping blacks in this country from ever trying to unite. I would just say to you, we're the ones who put Gaddafi in power. And when Gaddafi was trying to organize blacks to be the people who controlled the profits from the oil in their country, Gaddafi had to go. So when I hear the sister ask this question, it reminds me of basically Israel now is calling for some type of unity with the African nations when before Israel didn't seem to be interested. And I love Israel. I don't love many of these Israelis. It's kind of like, I guess Gandhi said he loved Christ, but he didn't love a lot of Christians. Because many of the folks in Israel who call themselves Jews, they're not Jews who practice the religion. They're using the term Jew for ethnicity purposes, and they're basically kind of like the Tea Party libertarians over here. They're the far right with the Netanyahu crowd. However, it does seem that more and more people who don't ascribe to that Netanyahu type of policies over in Israel seem to be speaking out more and more. So I find it interesting, and I do not trust Israel now claiming that they want to do more close liaison and alliance with our African nations. I will say that in my entire lifetime, there's always been a deliberate effort to dissuade blacks from even being conscious enough to realize that what goes on the continent of Africa has a direct effect on us. And I'm saddened to say that in the 8 years that President Barack Hussein Obama was in the White House, I saw more U.S. president militarily on the continent of Africa than any other time in my lifetime, and I don't believe a white president would have been able to get away with that. But because we had a black president in the White House, nobody seemed to want to say anything about it. So now we have AFRICOM over there, and it's just amazing the military presence that the United States has in places that we're not even aware of until some of our people come up dead, and then people go, even in Congress, I didn't know we had U.S. soldiers there. So, sister, I hope that helped to answer your question, but I would have to say whether that memorandum is legitimate or not, the agenda is definitely legitimate.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Thanks.
Have a good evening.
800-450-7876. Kiki's next, calling us from Iowa on line 4. Kiki, you're on with Mark from Anaheim.
Thank you for taking my call. Hey, Mark. I have a question. So, how are you?
Kiki, how did the elections go in Iowa for you?
You know what? It wasn't. Some are saying that it was good and bad. Me, I really didn't care because I don't feel like, to be honest with you, none of those candidates came out to like the black communities or anything and spoke with us. I'm glad. One thing that I will say, I'm glad that
Kiki, slow down. I hope the folks out there heard what the sister just said. Now, here's the sad thing, okay? We, as a community, and I say we, those of us who are brown and black, are so insignificant now to the power base in this country, they don't even feel the need to campaign in our neighborhoods. And Mr. Nelson, this was even true during the not just this recent election, but even during the last elections, when Jerry Brown was running for governor, and people like Meg Whitman were running, they didn't even come on Stevie Wonder's station to campaign in the black community. So that tells you how much they feel they need to even come down here and campaign. Now, I realize some Democrats take advantage and think that blacks or maybe some browns are going to automatically vote. But basically, they don't really care. They don't even care about our vote. They don't even take the time to campaign in your neighborhoods anymore. That's how inconsequential they feel that you are, unless you're probably in some states like down in the Deep South where there's a really large population of blacks. But I'm sorry, sister, go ahead.
No, you're absolutely right. But one thing that we were happy was that Steve King did get removed. He was saying a lot, but he's been getting down like that since I want to say it was Bonstead when he was our governor, and Bonstead was filmed having a Confederate flag on his desk, and it was not even a big uproar. Whereas if this was like Chicago or something, it would have went down, you know. But my question for you, Mark, is with the election. Speaking of it, there's been so many things floating about that when the new House gets sworn in January, they might, and Maxine Waters and some other people might go in and subpoena Trump's tax records and try to get him overthrown. To me, in my opinion, I feel as though with the House and the Senate, they gave us both so that we won't act a fool, you know, because if it would have been another sweep like there was a couple years ago, who knows what would have happened. There probably would have been several California incidents like what had happened, which that fortunate event that happened last night made those people find solitude. But I feel like they just kind of gave us a split party, you know, just to, keep us calm as a nation, which that says a lot about where we've come to. But where do you see that going? Do you feel as though that now that the House has it, the Democrats has it and the Republicans, do you see them fighting amongst another to get Trump removed? And I know you only said 2 questions, but if you feel like answering it, can you please talk about the U.S. dollar now being backed by gold and oil or other natural resources because of what's going on with the economy? Thank you, guys. Thank you, Mark, so much. I missed you so much, and I'll take my call off here. Thank you.
All right, so I'm trying to do this quickly. Time. This is the fastest 2 hours on the radio, Mr. Nelson. As far as the new House being sworn in January, let me just refresh your memory, folks. In fact, I just had this conversation with some people who were visiting me from Charleston, South Carolina. I mean, literally, like less than an hour ago. When Al Gore ran for president, Mr. Nelson, that was one of the last times I came on your radio show before I stopped coming on because they passed the Patriot Act, and I told you that Al Gore would not be president. Do you remember why I told you Al Gore would not be president?
No, I remember you telling me that he wouldn't be president, but I didn't
Who
remember
ran
why.
with him?
I can't even remember.
And you know what? Most people I asked that question can't remember, including the family members I was talking to today just an hour ago. It was Joe Lieberman, sir.
Oh, yeah, right. Connecticut.
And what does he call himself?
Independent.
Okay, but now he is, but he wasn't back then. But my point is, as far as religion goes.
Oh, he's Jewish.
Okay, so let me ask you a question, Mr. Nelson. Where's Al Gore from? What home state is he from?
Where's he from? Tennessee?
And where did the Ku Klux Klan begin?
Pulaski, Tennessee.
And did Al Gore even win his own state when he ran for president?
No.
Because he had a Jew running with him. So what I'm telling you, folks, is I could go on with this, but I know we're running out of time. Al Gore was never intended to be president. And to make sure that George W. Bush would be elected, they gave you Al Gore with a Jew from Tennessee who couldn't even win his own state. But to the shock, Al Gore still got so many votes that they had to bring the Supreme Court in to give the election to George W. Bush. Same thing happened in 2016, by the way. Hillary Clinton was not intended to be president. They want Donald Trump in the White House. And they gave you Hillary Clinton because they figured Hillary was the worst Democratic person they can give you. And with enough progressives angry at the way Hillary stole the election from Bernie, Donald Trump would win. And yet Hillary still got 3 points. In spite of all the gerrymandering, the computer ripoffs, Hillary still got 3.9 million more votes than Donald Trump, so they had to bring the Electoral College in. Why am I saying this to you, sister? In 2000, Maxine Waters stood before the House of Representatives. Asian, Latina, they were the only ones who stood up and demanded an investigation into Al Gore losing that election. All they needed was one U.S. senator to ratify it. Not one would do it. Who was standing behind them when they did it? The Vice President of the United States. And Al Gore did not even ratify it. Same thing happened when this whole thing went down with Hillary and Donald Trump. The House of Representatives now, so you got these people in Congress. What I'm trying to tell you is if the Senate doesn't ratify it, the House of Representatives can't get it passed. You're not going to see very much change in what's going on because nobody talks about the fact that the Democratic Party had a one-party rule in this country for more than 40 years. You aware of that, Mr. Nelson?
No, I'm not aware.
40 years.
I didn't know it was that long.
I mean, we're talking about back in the days when Eisenhower was president. Go back and look and see the last time there was a Republican majority in the U.S. Senate or the House of Representatives. And now people are acting like, oh, my God, the Democrats have been out for 8 years. It's the end of the world. I'm not going to lie to you, folks. And what I'm saying to you in the past, even with the Democratic Party having a one-rule party in both houses of Congress, people learned how to work together. This country does not do well when, regardless of what party's in the White House, when both houses of Congress are majority is the same party. And it's historically known that usually in the midterm election, in response to whatever president's in the White House, that's what party who ends up losing majority in the House of Representatives. You're not going to see much change. And a lot of these so-called progressives who think whether they're gay or Palestinian or whatever they are, welcome to the club, folks. You're boots, as we call them, Marine Corps. You're the rookies, and you better find out how the rules are played there because you're going to come to D.C. with all your little idealism. I know we got a break coming up, but your idealism is not going to go very far. I'm going to finish this on the other side, Mr. Nuff.
All right, cool. We're going to take a short break, as you mentioned, right here on FM 95.9 and AM 1450. WOL, where information is power. And thanks for rolling with us, folks. Our guest is Mark from Anaheim. The number to call to speak to Mark is 800-450-7876. Before we get back to him, let me just remind you some of the other folks are going to be stopping by in the next few days. Metaphysician Dr. B is going to be here. Also, Kwanzaa creator Dr. Maulana Karenga is going to join us. And Neely Fuller Jr., Dr. Wilson, the mentor, is going to be here as well. So tell all your friends if you're in the DMV to keep their radios locked on FM 95.9 and AM 1450 WOL. Let's go back to Mark.
Too strong, too black. Before I finish Kiki's question, I'm dedicating this show today to the memory of Dick Gregory, role model, good friend, mentor. Miss him. I understand Mr. Nelson has a special program coming up for the Queen.
Yeah, it's coming up real soon, later this month, and we'll let our audience know about it.
That should be very interesting and definitely well-deserved. You know, for those of you who don't know, Dick Gregory did serve in the U.S. Armed Forces. In fact, it was while he was in the U.S. Armed Forces that he began his comedic career. I'm also dedicating the show today to a woman, Lori Jackson. I'm sure you never heard of her, Mr. Nelson. I'm not giving you a hard time. I'm just saying I'm sure you never heard of her. Lori Jackson was a black woman who was an Army wife who went through hell on base, but she didn't play the game of being barefoot and pregnant and shutting up the way they wanted her to back in the 70s. And she stood up for the rights of herself and other women who were married to those proudly serving in our U.S. Armed Forces. And she beat the Army at their own game, so she became a prolific civil rights attorney. Now, I was in Quantico, Virginia back in the 80s, early 80s. I left Quantico in April of 82 after I graduated from the basic school. And a few months after I left Quantico, there was a gentleman, a Marine, his name was Lindsey Scott, who was arrested for rape, kidnap, attempted murder, and assault with a deadly weapon. He was black. Well, I should say he is black. She was white. They gave him 30 years of hard labor at Leavenworth. I lost a lot of respect for a general back then. The commanding general back then was Toomey. And thank God for black Marines, Mr. Nelson, because the next commanding general of Marine Corps Base Quantico was General Frank E. Peterson, somebody else who I knew and who wrote me a letter right before he retired. Frank Peterson was the general who allowed that investigation to be reopened. Laurie Jackson was the attorney who reopened that case. Lindsey Scott was found not guilty in a subsequent retrial in a court-martial. And it's sad because most folks don't know the name civil rights attorney Laurie Jackson. That's spelled Lori Jackson. She's definitely worth being researched, folks. There was a movie made about her a few years back. General Frank Peterson, for those who you don't know, was the first black allowed to be a pilot in the Marine Corps. They would send him on missions into Vietnam, knowing that he wouldn't come back, and he always did. His planes got shot up to hell, but he always came back. And by the time General Peterson retired as a three-star general, he was the senior naval aviator for the entire United States. So he was called the Golden Eagle. And I still have a letter that I treasure that he sent me. I tried to talk him out of retiring, and of course I didn't know back then what I know now, but I strongly believe that it's because, Mr. Nelson, that he did get involved with Lindsey Scott's reopening of the court-martial, and because he was a black Marine who was looking out for another black Marine, that sent a message to other folks that, hey, we can't trust this guy. We need him to go along with the program. So I think that's what really ended his career at 3 stars. Now, of course, back in those days, they would tell you that an aviator wouldn't be commandant. Well, that's a bunch of crap because after General Peterson was gone, guess who was the commandant? P.X. Kelly. And P.X. Kelly was an aviator. So I just want to remember those folks. Laurie Jackson is no longer with us. Dick Gregory is no longer with us. Frank Peterson is no longer with us. But these folks are the ones who paved the ways for those as myself who later on became Marines, who were out there on the front line sacrificing their lives and their careers for us. And Mr. Nelson, of course, October 23rd of this year was the 30th anniversary of the Beirut bombings. That's personal for me because I was stationed at 29 Palms, part of a rapid deployment contingent on the Marine Corps there. I had a black Marine who, or as they call it, dark green Marine. He was a sole surviving child in his family, and he was always whining about being in the rapid deployment force. So I pulled a few strings to have him sent back to Camp Lejeune in North Carolina. And my unit didn't go. His unit went and he got killed. A lot of Marines died, Navy SEALs. It was more than one barracks. And this year was the 30th anniversary, and there was hardly a whisper about it. So I just want to remember those folks today because they gave their lives. And there's so much more I can share, but we have so little time. So getting back to Kiki's question, because I only wanted one question, but Kiki, you know I love you, so I'll give you a break this time. The U.S. dollar is going down. I was with some of my service from Team France this weekend, and they loved me so much that I exchanged money with them, but they were taking a loss because the euro is worth more than the U.S. dollar. So when I would buy a $20 euro from one of my female surfers, I give her $20, but she gave me a 20 euros. The 20 euros is worth more. It's interesting because even at the surf contest we had China. I had some guy from Taiwan copping an attitude with me, and I go, listen, dude, I'm old enough to remember when Taiwan was Formosa, so don't even go down that road. And his surfers didn't even know what Formosa was. So for you folks who don't know this, to answer Kiki's question, when Nixon was president, he cut a deal with China, and we could no longer call Formosa, and that's when we called it Taiwan. And that's when we took the U.S. dollar. Well, I say we, but the United States removed the U.S. dollar off the gold standard. And we were basically selling the U.S. gold at $35 an ounce, and countries like China was gobbling it up. So, Kiki, the U.S.-backed petrodollar is on the decline, and I just heard some world leader, I can't remember right now, who came out publicly yesterday after the election is going that the U.S. dollar is going down. So for those folks out there who want to do some research into this, because I know we got a lot more questions, look into BRICS. BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and, well, I just forgot the last country, Mr. Nelson, South Africa. How could I forget? So those 5 countries right now are investing into a money system that's going to try to take the U.S. dollar down as the number one money. So I hope that helps answer her question.
All right. Thanks, Kiki. 800-450-7876. John is reaching out to us from the Bay Area. He's on line 5. Johnny, you're on with Mark.
Mark, how you doing?
Every day is a holiday, sir.
How's it going? That's good. This is Johnny from the Bay Area.
Yes, sir.
So make sure you're doing well.
Uh-huh.
See you later. Have a great day.
Yeah, okay. So, Mr. Nelson, I'll just say this. That brother right there is one of the most knowledgeable individuals on the planet, and he's just touching bases to make sure I'm still alive. Let's move to the next call.
All right. 800-450-7876. Paul's calling from Maryland. He's on line 3. Paul, you're on with Mark from Anaheim.
Yes, Mark. Where do you stand on the global currency reset? There's a lot of talk out here about the Iraqi dinar and the Zimbabwe and Indonesian rupiah and Vietnamese dong, among others, are supposed to increase in value. Are you a believer in that, or do you know what may substantiate that?
Okay, Mr. Nelson, I got a sneaking suspicion whoever Paul is calling in from Maryland, this is kind of a rhetorical question in his part, but he wants to know what I'm thinking.
You're correct. But we don't.
Yeah, okay, so I'll just say this. I think the U.S. dollar is in trouble. And I think that the Republican Party, including Trump, has done a very good job of trying to keep the U.S. economy afloat much longer than many people thought it would. But we're headed for a major recession, if not a depression. We've been in a bull market for far too long. I should say, it's coming to an end. And when it comes crashing down, it's going to probably be worse than it was in 2007, 2008. I'm not trying to be doom and gloom. I just call it the way I see it. And
but is that global currency a reality?
Well, hang on, I'm getting to that, sir.
Oh, okay.
And as Mr. Nelson will tell you, sadly, when I come on a show like this and tell you all what's going to happen, I don't like it, I don't agree with it, but unfortunately, it happens. So prepare yourselves, folks, because we're getting ready to hit a major economic calamity in this country. Now, whether it happens in the next 3 months, the next 6 months, I'm not sure, but it's coming, and when it does, it's going to be very ugly, and a lot of us are going to suffer. As far as what the Paul from Maryland is, we have a lot of issues going on right now. We have the Bitcoin industry. We have people who want Great Britain to pull out of with the Brexit, okay? And as you know, Great Britain is the one country that's not on the euro. They're still using the pounds. There are a lot of issues going on with this globalization. Now, my personal thing is I'm a internationalist, but I'm not a globalist. Sometimes when I hear Donald Trump talks, he sounds the same way about the globalism kind of thing because it gives up too much national sovereignty. What I'll say to you is, Paul, I truly believe that we're going to probably be in a world war soon. In fact, I've told many of the surfers at the contest this weekend, because I know a lot of them have hopes of being on various Olympic teams in 2020. Right now, I'm not trying to be a gloom or doom person. I truly believe we are going to be in a world war, unfortunately, probably before the Olympics start. I'm serious. That's how I really see. I hope I'm wrong. So when it comes to this global currency that you're referring to, we're not going to truly know the outcome of that because these tariffs that President Trump is enacting, and now other countries are now responding and retaliating in kind or even greater, that's going to lead to what I believe a physical, when I say war, shooting war, and we're not going to know the answer to your question, sir, until the outcome of that.
And when do you think?
So let me hang on a second, Paul. You're saying a conventional war, then not a nuclear war, but a conventional?
Oh, there won't be a nuclear war. There won't be a nuclear war. No, it'll be conventional. There won't be a nuclear war. Paul. But what I'm saying is, when Paul asked this question about this global currency, there are so many different fishes in the fire, and so many people today who are not going by the paradigms of old white men who are running this country. Old white men in this country still base everything on gold and silver and dollar. And now you have people doing electronic currency that doesn't fit that paradigm, and they don't even know how. You have banks that don't even want to recognize Bitcoins. And I'm not a big fan of Bitcoin because most people can't even figure out how they're going to handle it, and it's all on computers, and it could be hacked or whatever. I'm just saying that there's so many different new paradigms under this millennial shift. When Paul asked this question, anybody who could come on this show and claim to you they have the answer is lying to you. Anything I would answer to Paul is pure speculation. But what I'm saying is the true answer to Paul's question, we're not going to know till the outcome of the next World War. And I really believe we're headed for a World War.
And do you think have any time in your head of when that may occur?
I think it's already started. In fact, I tell people all the time, World War II never ended. You name me one country since 1945 where we haven't had 35 or more countries in a war.
Yeah. Well, thanks for keeping informed and informing us. I really appreciate it.
However, I will say for those folks out there, this question that Paul just answered, Mr. Nelson, this could be a college course. I strongly recommend, I know you guys aren't going to like this, but hey, I was a member of think tanks. Start reading Foreign Affairs. That's printed by Council on Foreign Relations.
Since you went there, the Council of Foreign Relations, Stacey Abrams is a member of the Council of Foreign Relations. And,
so practically everybody who's a major member of any news network is a member of Council of Foreign Relations. Yeah, I've been on Council of Foreign Relations mailing list since 1979. I get Foreign Affairs.
Right. And he implied that was the reason not to vote for her. Your thoughts?
I think anybody who thinks that is crazy because, like I said before, if you do your research, I don't know too many generals who I've ever worked for or any world leaders that aren't members of World Affairs Council or Foreign Affairs Council on Foreign Relations.
Right. Hold that thought right there, Mark, because we've got to take a break as we're closing on the top of the hour. I'll let you finish up on the Council on Foreign Relations on the other side. Folks, you too can join our discussion with Mark from Anaheim. Our number is 800-450-7876. We'll take your calls next on FM 95.9 and AM 1450. WOL, where information is power. Thank you for staying with us, folks. It's a shade after 6 o'clock on the East Coast. Our guest is Mark from Anaheim, and the number to call to speak to Mark is 800-450-7876. Mark, I'm going to let you finish responding to the claim about the CFR.
So, Mr. Nelson, during the break, I grabbed the most recent issue that I just got in the mail. This is November through December 2018 Foreign Affairs. Here's an ad on page 34. Global Citizen. To understand global issues, you must become part of them. This is an advertisement by the New York University School of Professional Studies. Now, the cover of this magazine is entitled, Do Nuclear Weapons Matter? Now, above that, they talk about Mike Pompeo and how to confront Iran. But, Mr. Nelson, with my background, those are the salacious headlines to get you to want to buy the magazine. I already have a subscription, so I don't need the salacious headlines. So let me tell you what's in this magazine that's not on the cover. The Committee to Save the World Order. America's allies must step up as America steps down. That's the article you folks want to read. America's allies must step up as America steps down. And Mr. Nelson is sad because 2 years ago, I came on a radio show with you in December of 2016, and I stated to you that, ironically, the only country left that the Nazi occults haven't taken over was Germany. And I told you that when Merkel goes down, then they're going to have control. Merkel's stepping down in December, Mr. Nelson. They got control. And how do I know? Most of my mentors were World War II Nazis that came to this country. World War II OSS old boys. OSS later became CIA. And World War II Office of Naval Intelligence. And they taught me well. And everything these old guys, most of them are dead now. It's happening on a global scale. Let's take some calls, Mr. Nelson.
All right.
800-450-7876.
Let's go to Buffalo, New York. Anthony's waiting for us on line 4. Anthony, you're on with Mark from Anaheim.
Hey, how you doing, Mark?
WKBW. Sorry. Well,
hey, Mark.
I should be using those call signs on another radio station, huh? That's an FCC violation, huh? Anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead, brother.
Oh, you're fine. Hey, I'm a younger guy, so this question, well, I'll just ask it and you can let me know about it. So Roland Martin recently made a comment about people who don't vote. He said fake conscious Negroes are a disgrace if you don't vote. So I wanted to ask you about those comments because I watch him sometime and he talks a lot of politics and stuff like that. And I just wanted to ask you about that comment. And how do you feel about us voting? Because you heard a lot just out of nowhere about go vote, and I was kind of on the fence about, does voting help or does it do absolutely nothing? That's my question.
Okay.
I hope it's not too out of the ordinary.
So, Mr. Nelson, as you know, this question has come up ever since I began coming on your show during the election year in 1992 when I told you that William Jefferson Clinton was going to be president. And I told you that when he was running against George Herbert Walker Bush and Ross Perot, and that all three of them were cousins whose families all came from the same small town over across the pond. And I even told you back then that most people don't even know that George Bush has a son that was born in Compton, California, and that in 1992, Ross Perot controlled 95% of the mutual bonds in Compton, California. And so when you folks think you're voting for somebody, you don't even realize the only reason Ross Perot entered the race was to make sure that enough votes were pulled from George Bush to put William Jefferson Clinton in the White House. Anyway, I say all this because I never tell people to vote or not to vote. My voting was taken away from me the same reason for Native Americans in this country. I don't use street addresses because Mr. Nelson will tell you I kind of work for some alphabet agencies, and I had to be careful who knew where I lived or what I did. So because I use a post office box, I always have. I'm not allowed to vote in California because they claim I could vote twice by giving them a post office box. I will say this, when it comes to voting, I always try to tell people, if you don't focus so much on the national elections, please focus on the local elections. All elections are local. See, Democrats focus too much on the nationals. Republicans focus on putting people on the city council, school boards, magistrates, local judges, and that's how they pass. And folks, trust me when I say this to you. Listen to me. If you don't hear anything else I say today, while some Democrats are patting themselves on the back for successes in the House of Representatives, the fact is, folks, with the U.S. Senate gaining strength on the right, we have become ever more closely to a Article 5 convention. That's not a constitutional amendment, an Article 5 convention. If the Article 5 convention convenes, we can now have a federal government that has absolutely no power, and all power returns to the individual states. So for all you colored folks and women and Native Americans and Chicanos who live in those certain red states, where do you think you stand if this Article 5 convention convenes? I'm serious. I am not being hyperbolic when I tell you this. And Mr. Nelson, since I'm doing this show for Marine Corps Birthday and Veterans Day, let me really remind the listeners. The only reason black folks are even allowed to serve in the U.S. Armed Forces is because Harry S. Truman signed an executive order. Now, Mr. Nelson, what can any president do to an executive order that was passed before he or she was in office?
Throw it in the trash.
Donald Trump, tomorrow morning, if he wanted to, can eliminate all blacks from U.S. Armed Forces, and you folks don't even realize it. Because you don't study civics, you don't really know constitutional law, you don't know U.S. government. And by the way, with the Republican Party with William Bennett, Secretary of Education, where they started taking that out of the classroom because they don't want you to know how the government operates. You folks don't have any rights. Most of the so-called rights that blacks and browns and women have are based on amendments and executive orders. And Kavanaugh told you, just like Bork tried to do back in 1980s, when I get on the Supreme Court, I promise you that I will ensure the original intent of the founding fathers. That doesn't include blacks. That doesn't include browns. That doesn't include women. That doesn't even include whites unless you are wealthy landowners. And if you guys think I'm blowing smoke, do your homework, because women in this country didn't have the right to vote till 1920. All right? So when I have people talking about the birthright issue, let me just tell you what that really means. While they focus on this so-called caravan that's coming up north, Mr. Nelson, that's not based on the caravan. Do you know where the original issue of being born in this country, making you a citizen, comes from?
No idea.
You ever heard of a black man named Dred Scott?
Yeah.
Well, Dred Scott tried to file a lawsuit, and they go, "What are you talking about, colored boy?" Because they didn't use that word. You can't file a lawsuit. But I was born in the U.S. That's where that issue came from. And it wasn't until the 14th Amendment was later passed that gave blacks the birthright, even though we were born in this country. And it still excluded people. I mean, you had things like the Chinese exclusion laws and other stuff on the books. You know when the Chinese exclusion law was taken off the books, Mr. Nelson? Like right before World War II. I'm not making this up. So why you folks sit here and talk about what you have as – you don't have any rights. You were given temporary rights. And as far as most of the blacks and women and browns, that was the Great Society experiment that was done, you know, after Roosevelt left office and, you know, Johnson came in and had to keep the promises that Kennedy made. That 50 years is up, folks. These folks are taking their country back. I sound flippant because I've been trying to warn you about this since 92, and you didn't listen to me, and now they're doing it, and it's all legal. So while everybody's talking about the great success that the Democratic Party did, what I strongly suggest every listener on here, this is the second thing I'm telling you today, if you don't hear anything else I say, do some research on Article 5 convention. Find out how many states right now have a Republican governor or a Republican legislator, and how many states they need to call one. And if they call it, you have to convene it. And when they convene it, the federal government will have no authority over the so-called U.S. citizens in this country. Let's move on, sir.
Before we move on, if that happens, what happens to 45? Is he out of office, or is he still?
He's a bloody dictator because he's pushing for that. He told you when he came in he was going to burn it down. That's what burn it down means. Steve Bannon's an anarchist. They want to destroy – Mr. Nelson, these folks hate the federal government. They want no federal rules or regulations. Everybody Trump has appointed to a federal position is somebody who's there to destroy that federal agency. And they're doing it. I know people, personal people of mine who have been working for these organizations for 30 years who are quietly retiring because they're not going to put up with it, so they're leaving, which is what they want them to do anyway because it's either my way or the highway, says here Trump. I told your listeners in 2012 that we would have a dictator by 2020, if not by 2016. And stand by, folks, because if they do take Trump down, you got Pence. And trust me, Pence is far more worse than Donald Trump is. Trump is just there because he likes the self-aggrandizement. Pence, he's an ideologue. And dude, if he gets in the White House, Mr. Nelson, I might have to talk to some of my surfers from around the world and find me a place to move. I'm serious. It's a heart attack.
All right. Hold that thought right there. We're going to take our last look at the traffic and weather in the DMV. And we've got some folks who want to speak to you. 800-450-7876 gets you in touch with Mark from Anaheim. Your calls are next on FM 95.9 and AM 1450. WOL, where information is power. And thanks for staying with us, folks. Our guest is Mark from Anaheim. Most of you know him before that Mark's not his real name. It's not really from Anaheim, but we'll deal with it. 800-450-7876. Those are the numbers to speak to him. And let's go to the calls. Mark, you did finish what you were saying before we left, right?
Boys, we never finish what I'm saying. So just listen to me, listeners, seriously. Right now, believe it or not, the U.S. Senate has a lot more power than people seem to realize. And based on the demographics, the U.S. Senate may be red for the next 30 years. Worse, Mr. Nelson, by 2035, something like 75% of the U.S. population is going to be living in something like 35 states. Are you aware of that?
You still with us?
I'm here. Can you hear me, Mr. Nelson?
Dropped out.
I'm not dropped out. You can't hear me.
Oh, okay, good.
Can you hear me?
Can you repeat that? Yeah, we can hear you now.
By 2035, 75% of the U.S. population will be living in something like 35 states. Are you aware of that?
No, I'm not.
And most of those states are red. So what I'm telling you is just like this past election where the U.S. Senate had far more people vote for Democratic senators, but who gained in the U.S. Senate? The Republicans. It may be like that, Mr. Nelson, for the next 30 years.
Better get that dust off that passport. But hang on a second. We got folks. I'm going to talk to you. 800-450-7876. Charles has been holding for a while. He's calling from the district. He's on line 6. Charles, you're on with Mark from Anaheim.
Mark, questions for you. Just a few quick questions. One, what do you make of the unquestionable control that George Soros has over the Democratic Party? Secondly, how long do you think Trump can play with the Jews in the Federal Reserve before they offer him a correction of sorts? What do you make of Farrakhan's warning of war between Israel and the so-called Middle East? And would you agree that it's an absolute insult to have a born Hungarian, that being Tibor Nagy, as the Undersecretary of State for African Affairs? And earlier you mentioned that a depression is coming. I'd like for you to make sure that you remind the people that we had 8 years of QE under Obama, and that this stock market is overinflated, and that they absolutely better prepare. And then finally, Florida. What's your take on Florida?
All right. So, Mr. Nelson, I'm going to tell you right now, I got to follow the rules, so I'm going to only take 2 out of the 6 questions. One, people talk about George Soros. I came on this radio show a year ago, and I told folks when they hear George Soros, that's code word for Jew. Now, all of a sudden, all these other talk shows on the left are saying, when you hear George Soros, that's code word for Jew. George Soros, when I hear about George Soros or the Keck, I'm going to mention Keck. We talk about the Mercer family or the Koch family. It reminds me of that Eddie Murphy movie, Trading Places, where you got 2 people behind the scenes who you don't even realize they have made a bet, and they're just playing with your lives. Because this is what wealthy people are bored. So they get involved in politics, and they start screwing stuff up. So when I see Soros doesn't spend most of his time on U.S. politics. He spends most of his time on politics outside the U.S. But, folks like Alex Jones, they repeat, George Soros. They don't ever mention the Mercer family. They don't ever, who put Donald Trump in the White House. They don't ever mention the Koch brothers. They don't mention the fact that if you want to see the billionaires who are really messing with the politics, most of them are not Democrats, and it's not George Soros. When they talk about George Soros controlling voting machines, that's a lie. I've already pointed out to you that most of the voting machines in Ohio are owned by Mitt Romney's son. Most of the voting machines that are controlled in places like Georgia, Florida, et cetera, are by Republicans. But you repeat the lie long enough, people believe it. George Soros is not a threat. Most of his interaction, or even if you want to say the term interference, is with politics outside the United States, not in the United States. And the only other question out of those 6 I'm going to answer, just for respect of the people who have been waiting online and we're running out of time. When it comes to the depression, and when I say the depression's coming, I don't want the depression to come. But this is what we have. We have the ebb and flow. You can't have a bull market the way we've had for so long without a bear market. In fact, this bull market has been one of the longest, if not the longest, in U.S. history. And the bear market's coming, and it's coming with a vengeance. Let's move on, Mr. Nelson.
What's that called? You say it's coming with a vengeance. And Charles, I thank you for your call. How bad is it? It's going to be like the 30s, or is it going to be like 07?
Let me put it this way, Mr. Nelson. I grew up in Jim Crow, South Carolina. The problem with the millennials today that I see, most of these black folks especially, have not taught their children what it was like that I know not being able to drink out of water fountain. And I'm not that old, folks. This didn't happen 100 years ago. In states like South Carolina, the laws may have been passed in the 50s, but they didn't actually enforce the laws till the 70s. That's why when I teach my little white girls in surfing, well, I don't teach, I coach. I get some little white girl coming out the water, and she's crying like, what's your problem? I can't do this. How long you been going to the beach? Since I was a baby? Well, let me explain something to you. I couldn't even go to the beach in South Carolina in 1975 because Negroes, I'm being polite here, weren't allowed to be on the beach. And I was on the College of Charleston Surf Club team in 1978. So you get your little white butt back out there and bring me a trophy. I can say that to them because it's real and it's true. And when these little white girls hear me say that, they know what I've gone through, and yet I didn't let no white man stop me from doing what I'm doing. And the problem is, Mr. Nelson, too many black folks, especially the ones listening to this show, they sugarcoat and shelter their children from the things that we've already gone through, and they don't realize it's coming back, and they're not going to know how to survive it. We've been through this before, and we survived. And for you folks who haven't done your homework and realized what black folks have gone through in this country before, you're going to be the one suffering because you think you got rights and you think you're equal to white folks because in their mind you ain't, and you ain't white. And they're taking it back. I ain't got no problem with this. I've already been through this. I went through this as a child. You think I'm worried about the recession or depression or Jim Crow coming back? Bring it on. Because I've already said, if it can't get along, let's get it on. And most white folks respect me because they know I ain't going to punk out on them when the stuff is going down.
800-450-7876. Abdul is joining us out of L.A. He's on line one. Abdul, you're on with Mark from Anaheim.
Yeah, how you doing, Carl? Let me get back in this car so I can hear.
What's up, bro?
I just want to say I'm good, brother. How you doing? Number one, I definitely agree. Yes, sir. Every day's a holiday. I definitely agree with Mark about making sure that our children understand what's going on. Mine definitely understand in terms of the struggle.
Abdul, we seem to have lost you. You still there?
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
I can hear you fine, sir.
Put Abdul on hold till he gets in a better spot. I think he just climbed into his car. But here's a tweet.
All right.
Okay, seems like we have some technical issues there. So we're back on. Mark, you still with us? Is Mark still there? I'm not hearing Mark.
I can hear you. Somebody somewhere, best beware my crew.
All right, folks, we're back. We got kicked off our line for some reason or the other. Mark, can you hear me? And I'm not hearing Mark.
Hello.
Yes, I can hear you now.
Why, Mr. Nelson, let me ask you a question. Now, you and I have been doing radio shows since 1992. Do you realize in 26 years, I think I can count on two hands the number of shows you and I have done where I say something where we didn't get disconnected. Seriously. And this is why folks, seriously, this is why I don't do radio shows, because when I do radio shows with Nelson, now my telephone and my internet is going to be screwed up for the next 6 months. I wish I was making this up. So I just want to say this, Mr. Nelson, because I know Abdul had this question, and we got to move on to some other callers. Folks, I will never tell you not to vote. But what I will say to you is this. You have to start preparing now already for the election in 2020, because it's going to be here a lot sooner than you realize. So before we lose our connection again, we go to our next break, I'll just say this. I know a lot of you folks are trying to reach me. You can reach me at Mark from Anaheim, Political Sarcasm 101. I will tell you, I haven't been ignoring you, but because I do radio shows with Mr. Nelson, they attack
Mark,
me on the internet.
Right, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, I'll let you give out that information. We'll see if Abdul's ready for us right here on FM 95.9 and AM 1450 WOL, where information is power. And thanks for staying with us, folks. Our guest is Mark from Anaheim. The number to call to speak to Mark is 800-450-7876. Let's see if Abdul's still with us. It's on line one, calling from L.A. Abdul, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, Mark. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I definitely agree with Mark in terms of this economy being overstretched. But one of the other things that the sister called in earlier about, she called in about Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was the advisor to Obama.
Correct.
His book is called The Grand Chessboard. If she wants to do some in-depth research on that, and he's a slick one, so she can do that research there.
Well, also remember now, Brzezinski was the advisor to Bill Clinton.
Yes.
Of the new age, yeah. I mean, I know all about Brzezinski, and of course his daughter does, news shows.
Yeah. So it's a mixed bag, and I agree with Mark, specifically in terms of the Senate. I mean, we talk about the House and the noise and the racket that's going to come out of there, but the Senate is the final destination. They control all things in terms of federal funding, everything, federal judges, the whole nine. So, we just got another part of the show that's going to be as convoluted as it's been all the time. And that's about it. Thank you a lot, Mark. And my father was in the Marine Corps, brother, for 32 years.
Happy Marine Corps birthday to your father, in memory of your father, then.
Yes, sir.
All right.
Thank you, brother. You have a good day. Keep moving.
You too, sir.
All right. Thanks, Abdul. Mark, you want to respond to anything he said?
I just wanted to say, no, I mean, the brother covered it, but the thing is, I just want to say, because I know you listen, please I beg forgiveness, okay? I did a radio show with Mr. Nelson, and then shortly thereafter, like an idiot, I did a radio show with somebody else, and I paid for it because I've come under attack technologically, and I've had a major problem. I can't even access most of my Facebook pages that I created. So I know some of you folks have been sending me messages. I'm not ignoring you. I'm trying hard to get back into my own Facebook site. So please be patient, but I'm working on it.
All right. 800-450-7876. Let's go to line 3. Prince is calling from Alabama. Prince, you're on with Mark from Anaheim.
Mark from Anaheim. How you doing, sir?
Every day is a holiday, Prince, and I'll tell you this, Mr. Nelson, once again. Okay, you got these callers who are calling in because they're all worried about my safety. Okay, I'm still alive, brah, and I know you probably got something great to share with Mr. Nelson, so please share with all of us.
Yeah, man, I'm going to bring up two things and just get your response. So, I was living in Ohio the last 3 years, moved back to Alabama in June.
I went back to Ohio, and my city was gone. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay, so the interesting thing is we had a lady who was running here for Senate, and then also the governor. The governor didn't even have to debate the guy who was running for governor in Tuscaloosa because she knew she was going to win. She didn't even have to do any debate at all. And then Martha Roby, who's in the Senate, She didn't even have a victory party because she knew that by a landslide that she was going to win. And then the lady who was running against her name was Tabitha Eisner. She was like a minister. And she was talking when she lost that night, and she was saying that nobody from the Democratic Party even came down and helped, any assistance or anything. So while people patting themselves on the back about the Democrats got the House back, they don't even do anything as far as their own members, to help them within local elections. Is that screwed up? And I don't think people really realize that, really looking at it, man, who are they going to put on the ticket in 2020? I don't see it.
And you said you had a second thing, sir?
Yeah, and the second thing is I want to get your response to the education issue. I'm just working right now as a substitute teacher. I go to different schools day to day. Mark, I'm telling you, most schools I go to, I'm lucky if I see 10 white kids the entire day. They are taking their kids out of public schools. They're not putting them in
public schools. They call them government schools, and they don't want the government telling their children how to think.
Exactly. Yeah, they're nowhere to be found, man. And then, the issues that a lot of these kids are having, they can't read, they can't write, anything. I mean, it's awful, man. It's that messed up. So I just want to get your response also to education as well.
All right, Mr. Nelson. So once again, another brother who's calling in and being rhetorical. Mr. Nelson, right now you and I could communicate in front of the millennials, and most of them wouldn't have a clue. You know how we could communicate and they wouldn't have a clue?
How?
Cursive writing.
Yeah.
Because they're not even teaching it anymore. So to them, it looked like Aramaic. And, I have to digress here. So the brother's back in Alabama, Mr. Nelson, okay? I would tell him to get in touch with your buddy from Alabama who was in cahoots with the far right-wing Republicans down there who called me a liar and told about I wasn't stationed in Quantico, Virginia.
George.
Hey, that's the house Negro I was talking about, but I didn't call his name out, just like I don't call 45's name out here, Trump. But I would respond to Prince's questions, but he didn't really ask a question. He was actually sharing knowledge. One of the things I would say I find very interesting about what he just stated was the fact that the gubernatorial candidate didn't even bother debating. And that's because they already have it in the bag. They already know what they're going to do, Mr. Nelson. And it's sad. And also, he's doing the substitute teaching. Unfortunately, as you know, Mr. Nelson, we just had a recent tragic shooting, not the one here in Thousand Oaks, but one of them right before that involved a substitute teacher. The guy that went out and shot all these people, and it turned out that he was a substitute teacher with all his misogynist rhetoric on his Facebook sites and whatever, and then he goes into an area where he kills women and stuff. So I'm an education major. My major was secondary education and psychology, and I haven't taught since 1981 in the high schools, and I've taught various U.S. Armed Forces and law enforcement, stuff like that. And I do have a teaching credential to teach in the state of California in the colleges and universities, but I don't teach. And I commend anybody out there who has the stamina and the moral courage to teach in the so-called government schools, public schools, because teachers have very little authority over the students as much as parents have very little authority over their children at home. So let's move on, Mr. Nelson.
All right, I got a tweet question for you. It says, please ask your guest, what impact will the election in Brazil have on BRICS? They get just elected a new president.
Oh, my goodness. All right, so, Mr. Nelson, I was with the Brazilian team at the International Surfing Association's Junior World Championship. And there's a little girl down there who I just love to death, Taina Hinkle. She didn't go as far as I was hoping, but I'm surprised that the tweet came regarding the money in BRICS. That's not my concern. My concern is folks who look as let me just go back. Mr. Nelson, for many, many years on your shows, we did shows together, I had to remind listeners that there are more black people in Brazil per population than any country on the continent of Africa. Now, that changed around 2009, 2010. But per population, there were more blacks in Brazil than any other country, including every single country in Africa. Why do I say that? Because these folks, they don't know they're black till they come to the U.S. for surf contests, and people go at them like, and I'm always with the Brazil. I always give my South American surfers love. So the thing that happened recently, Mr. Nelson, was the election down in Brazil. This guy who just took over in Brazil is to the right of Donald Trump, and Donald Trump has already come out and publicly stated he is going to support this new presidential leader in Brazil 110%. And do you know who they're killing left and right down there with impunity in broad daylight, Mr. Nelson? You hear nothing about it?
Us?
Folks who look like you and I. Seriously. So as far as the BRICS thing goes, the BRICS thing's not going to be an issue until they start reducing the population down there and get online more with China, Russia, and India. But even and I'll tell you another country, Mr. Nelson, because I'm all with the South American young ladies and surfing. Argentina, 60% of their money value is gone, and you don't hear anybody even talk about it in the United States. So I have surfers who come up from Argentina who couldn't come for contests because 1 minute $1 in this country paid worth $1 worth of goods, and the next minute only paid 40 cents, and they couldn't afford their plane tickets to fly to surf contests. That's what's going on down in South America right now. So that's why, folks, you see this caravan, because many of the things that's going on in South America and Central America, the U.S. is behind much of that. We create the havoc down there. They can't live down there anymore, and they're trying to come here to a better life, and we won't let them in when they get here.
Okay.
I love this, Mr. Nelson, because I hear an echo on me and I hear an echo on you now.
It's crazy.
Hi, Mr. Trump. Hi, White House.
Oh, boy. But anyway, we're going to make it work. We're coming up on a break, so let's take the break.
This is Reverend Al Sharpton, host of Keeping It Real with Al Sharpton, WOL 95.9 FM and 1450 AM in this era of President.
Thanks for staying with us, folks. Get back to Mark in a moment. Let me just tell you who's coming up in the next few days. You're going to hear from Neely Fuller Jr. Once again about racism, white supremacy. Also, metaphysician Dr. B is going to join us, and the man who created Kwanzaa, Dr. Maulana Karim, is going to be here as well. So tell all your friends to keep it locked on FM 95.9 and AM 1450 WOL. Mark, did you finish, or do you want to take another call?
I'm never finished before the break. So, Mr. Nelson, I know it's not the station who does it, but every time I appear on your show, and I thank whoever does it, there are people who listen to your show who create a YouTube, okay? I don't know if you're aware of this, but many, if not most, of the shows I've appeared on here with you are now being taken down off of YouTube. Now, I don't use any profanity. I don't espouse racism. I don't espouse misogyny. I'm not calling for arms against the U.S. or anybody else. So what I'm saying to you, if there's anybody out there who's actually trying to provide facts and doesn't have a political allegiance, I don't belong to any political party. I have no allegiance to any political organization. All I do is share facts. And now many, if not most, of the YouTubes that were created when I appeared on your radio show are being taken down off YouTube sites. I have people across the pond in Europe telling me, when I come on your show, your radio show is not available to them.
We can know what's going on.
You don't know what I'm going through, but
that's a whole other story there. Trust me. I'm kind of used to it and expecting it, by the way. And having said that, though, let's keep moving. 800-450-7876. Wes is joining us from the ATL. He's on line one. Wes, you're on with Mark.
Hey, peace and blessings, Carl and my man Mark. Hey, Mark, I got banned on Facebook, man, because I post the truth, man. But look here, I got two questions, man. This so-called PSYOP thing in California, okay, that happened last night, okay, they said it was 6 off-duty police in the club. You mean not one of them punks couldn't take that dude down, man? Come on, Mark. That's Psalms, man. Okay? Hey, most police, they carry 2 or 3 weapons. When they kill a black man, they always got 2 guns. The one they shoot with in the throwaway gun, man. Okay? And my second question is, if you can hear me, didn't they push that old lady, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, down the steps? So they trying to take her out too, ain't it? Huh? You hear me, Carl?
I hear you. All right, Mark.
All seriousness, okay? The brother's referring to the borderline. That's in Thousand Oaks. Now, I probably would have been in Vegas when they had the big shootout last year. But you know, Mr. Nelson, why I wasn't there? Because when Obama got elected, I started seeing how these white folks really acted in the honky-tonk. Now, I'm very well known in the honky-tonk community and on the rodeo. I've been featured in Professional Bull Rider magazine. But after Obama got elected, and they got the Negro in the White House, oh, my God, these white folks really showed their true disposition. And even though I still run 3 honky-tonk Facebook sites, I rarely go out anymore. Wednesday nights, I used to often go to Borderline in Thousand Oaks. And then invariably, I'm going to know some folks. There's so much already I know about this that I can't share because there's still family members who have not been notified or contacted regarding their loved ones who have been shot or dead. I will just say this. The brother alluded to off-duty officers there. Yes, there were off-duty cops there. That's all I'll say about that. And as far as Ginsburg, I don't know if she has been pushed down, but I just know that people want her to be gone so Trump can put somebody else on the Supreme Court. In politics, nothing surprises me. So, Mr. Nelson, let's move on.
All right, you can move on. Next question.
Another tweet from Johnny. Go ahead, Go ahead, Wes. Is Wes still there? Is he?
No, I think he's gone, sir.
All right, tweet question for you. Ask Mark. This is Johnny. He says, ask Mark if there's any truth to the Mueller investigation.
Regarding what? You mean is Trump guilty? Well, listen. All right, listen, okay? Much of the Mueller investigation is hype, and it's really sad that the Democratic Party rested all their laurels on winning the midterm elections based on Trump and collusion. As I said earlier, Trump has been involved with Russia since at least I know from 1987. But much of the stuff and the activity that the Russians, whoever they are, Trump wasn't a part of it. Trump may not even had knowledge of it. People keep confusing collusion with Trump and his unethical, improper, and possibly illegal business transactions with the Russians, okay? And people keep confusing the two, and they're not the same. I've never wasted much time or effort focusing on Trump being in collusion with the Russians trying to disrupt the 2016 elections. What I've always been upset about is Trump couldn't get loans in the United States. So he had to get loans outside the United States. Now, we have a guy who's just appointed to the Supreme Court after one Supreme Court justice resigned. Well, that Supreme Court justice resigned. He just happened to be the father of a guy who helped Trump with bank loan difficulties, and he was a guy working for, a bank in Germany. When Trump couldn't get loans in the United States, he got loans from Saudi Arabia. He got loans from Russia. He got loans from Germany and a couple other places. So I'm just saying there's a conflict of interest when you have a president in the White House who has direct business ties with companies and within countries and banks within countries that we have issues with. And that's why you didn't see Trump come out and say much about Saudi Arabia after this so-called killing in an embassy in Turkey. That guy didn't attack Saudi Arabia, Mr. Nelson. That guy was forced to leave Saudi Arabia because he was attacking Donald Trump. And you don't hear anybody talking about it. And this is not new. When George Herbert Walker Bush was president, he did very little about Tiananmen Square because I already told you listeners how Nixon was cutting deals with China. Well, guess who was the ambassador to China when Nixon was president? George Herbert Walker Bush. Guess who had 7 golf courses in China after that? George Herbert Walker Bush's relative. So when Tiananmen Square happened, George Herbert Walker Bush was the president, did very little about it. Follow the money trail, folks, because they never bite the hand that feeds them. Let's move on, sir.
All right, another tweet for you. Indian Mike says, can you have Mark touch on November the 18th, 1978, Jonestown 40th anniversary?
Oh, dang. No kidding, folks, because, I mean, that's coming up, Mr. Nelson. And as you know, you and I did a radio show back in 1998 on the 20th anniversary, for lack of a better term. And what I came on, because I know you had listeners from L.A. who had relatives in Jonestown. What I'll just say to you is this, okay? Because I don't care, man. Yeah. LAPD has a guy named Horace Frank. No love lost there. And he's from Guyana. And I'll just say this to you, okay? We had a senator from California, Leo Ryan, who went down to investigate that. And they killed him. You know who killed him, by the way, Mr. Nelson? Former Marine. Most of the trucks down there were U.S. Army trucks. Most of the people, I really get sick of people talking about, oh, he drank the Kool-Aid. Because, one, it's an insult to the people who died in Jonestown. Secondly, it wasn't Kool-Aid in Jonestown. It was Flavor Aid. So you're not sounding smart or sophisticated when you're like, oh, he's drinking the Kool-Aid. That shows how ignorant you are. But more importantly, most of the people who were killed down there actually had needle injections or gunshot wounds. So they didn't, because blacks don't commit suicide on a wholesale, come on, Mr. Nelson, that's a white European thing. There's so much about that, I mean, we don't talk about. I mean, Dianne Feinstein has connections to that. A lot of those folks, Jerry Brown has connections to that. I mean, Jim Jones was Man of the Year in the Bay Area. A lot of Democrats have connections to that. And a lot of folks who feel right now how they want to leave this country, that's what Jonestown gave them the opportunity to do, is to leave this country. But that was, I'm not going to say that was a CIA operation. What I will say is there are certain people who had CIA connections that ran that operation, and it led to one of the largest, if not the largest, mass suicide murders / events in world history, not U.S. history, but world history. And I know, Mr. Nelson, you got listeners right now listening to this show who have relatives who were there. And it didn't end there. There were people who were cops in the Bay Area were killed by surviving members of Jonestown. And Mr. Nelson, you talk about Jim Jones. There have been other cult leaders who modeled Jim Jones to follow their cults, white and black. It's still going on, Mr. Nelson. And I have not forgotten it. I didn't want to really mention it today, but, the call is right. It's coming up soon.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you, too, I will tell you, because we got like a minute left, but Jim Jones, didn't he have a lot of famous people who followed him as well?
Absolutely. Let me tell you, folks, there are a lot of cultists from the Jim Jones era that are in Hollywood and government, both on the federal and state levels, and in the intelligence community. So if you folks want to find me at Mark from Anaheim, Political Sarcasm 101 on Facebook, and that's a fan page, not the group site. I promise you I'm just going to start going to the library and try to get you guys, because they've got my home computer all messed up. Mr. Nelson, before I go, I have a question for you. I don't even know.
Yes, sir.
So, Mr. Nelson, before I go, I have a question for you. Seriously.
Uh-huh.
In all the years that you and I have been doing radio shows, has anybody been able to come on your show and tell their listeners that I've been lying to them or giving them misinformation?
Nope. Nobody.
So in memory of Dick Gregory, what Dick Gregory has always reminded me is, one, he's glad that I stood apart because he knows that I'm coaching in the surfing community where only whites dominate. And two, Dick Gregory always said the truth doesn't have to be validated by ignorance.
He sure did. All right, let's get out of here because this is crazy. You don't know what I'm going through, but I'm glad it's over. Thanks, Mark. We'll talk later. Folks, we're running out of here. Stay strong, stay positive. We'll see you tomorrow at 4 o'clock right here on FM 95.9 and AM 1450. WOL, where information is power.